Today is Thursday, March 6th, 2025. This is Quick Start from CBN News. I'm Dan Andros. The Abbey Gate Mastermind brought to America for justice. We'll have that top story and more coming up on today's podcast, where we bring you news from a Christian perspective. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating. You can email us your thoughts as well. quickstartpodcast@cbn.org. We're getting through the news of the day together. So glad you're here with us each and every weekday, bright and early. And joining me today to get through it all, CBN's Trey Goins-Phillips. And Trey, on the focus story today, the Canadians are booing us yet again.
Yet again, they're booing us, but they didn't seem to realize that the captain of their Canadian team is an American, so that kind of threw a wrench into the works there.
Yeah, a little bit of a whoopsie. We'll get the details coming up on the focus story. On the main thing, the pastor at the center of the Asbury Revival shares what sparked the movement and why he says God is still moving today. That is coming up on the main thing. The News in 90 is up next, right after this.
It's Holy Week in Jerusalem, and the city is restless. The people of Israel welcome Jesus as king, his followers ready for revolution. But instead of taking the throne, Jesus turns the tables.
Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees! How will you escape being condemned to hell?
Experience Holy Week like never before.
What have you done?
Coming soon to theaters, The Chosen, Last Supper. Get your tickets now.
All right, and with that, we are going to head to the news in 90 seconds. President Trump announced during his joint address to Congress that the U.S. has captured and extradited Mohammad Sharifullah, the alleged mastermind behind the 2021 Abbey Gate bombing in Kabul that killed 13 American service members and 168 Afghans. He was accused of planning the ISIS-K attack, and he arrived at Dulles Airport under FBI custody early Wednesday. The Justice Department charged him with conspiring with a designated terror organization and aiding ISIS in multiple attacks, including the March 2024 Moscow concert hall bombing that killed 145 people. FBI Director Kash Patel and Attorney General Pam Bondi were instrumental in the mission in bringing him to U.S. soil. Trump vowed he would face the, quote, swift sword of American justice. And the mayors of 4 self-declared sanctuary cities tried to defend their policies before the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee on Wednesday, insisting they're not violating federal law, even as they openly refuse to enforce immigration policies. New York Mayor Eric Adams claimed that being a sanctuary city does not make New York a safe haven for criminals and that the city follows all the laws. However, his administration has repeatedly refused to cooperate with federal immigration enforcement. Those are just some of today's top headlines. You can check out those stories and more at cbnnews.com. And Trey, this has been sort of the conundrum that these essentially virtue signaling mayors have found themselves in. I don't think they ever thought this was going to come to their doorstep when they declared themselves sanctuary cities. I truly think they believed that they were just making a statement, a political statement, and trying to shame anyone who was in favor of turning away illegal immigrants and in favor of legal immigration. I don't think they ever thought this was going to come to their doorstep, but here we are. The problem got insane during the Biden administration, and we saw it all play out on our television screens, and in real life, you see people overflowing in cities as they've been sent around to these sanctuary cities. It's just been an amazing turn of events that really kind of has shown in real time what happens to someone when reality meets virtue signaling.
Yeah, I think for a lot of these cities and the leaders of these cities, it's the chickens are coming home to roost, right? I think they're kind of reaping the consequences of these policies that they've put in place, as you said, from a reactionary position, right? They were doing it because they wanted to signal how much they hated Trump. But when your politics, and this is the case for either party, Republican, Democrat, or something else, when your policies are rooted in reactionism, I think you kind of are blinded to oh, what is this actually going to look like down the road when when I actually am going to have to
Yeah.
stick to whatever policy I put in place. And I think that is for sure what we're seeing now is people having to deal with the consequences. I mean, they're just being flooded with illegal immigration, and they're having to deal with it, and they're bearing the brunt of having to deal with it. And it's kind of a sad irony, but a bit funny watching these cities struggle with this stuff, but they're still talking about how terrible Trump is and how terrible immigration reform is. So it's like they're trying to walk and chew gum at the same time, and they're not necessarily being that successful at it.
No, they're really not. And look, I feel for everyone who's been essentially lied to by the
Yeah.
previous administration saying, hey, basically sending the message that our doors are open and we're going to find a place for you and you'll have a safe haven, because many of them have risked their entire livelihoods in the hands of drug traffickers, and who are charging tons of money to get them over the border. Many of them don't make it or are abused along the way. And it's just a horrible lie that they've been told, and this hope that they've been given, this false hope. And now you see people turning away because the opposite message that the Trump administration has sent. And hopefully there's just some sanity there, that even if you're in a horrible situation or a tough situation in a different country, you don't want to make it worse. You don't want to compound this mistake by breaking the law here, coming into this country illegally. It's just not the way to go. And, the people who are truly in a life or death situation that number is a lot smaller than the ones who are just looking for a better opportunity. And so
Yeah.
either way, regardless of what circumstances are, I mean, we're certainly praying for those individuals involved, but we also need to pray for the safety of our country, as we saw at the joint address last night, the joint session of Congress there. These people that have been impacted by it, murdered by illegal immigrants. So the more people you let in, the more bad people are going to come in among them, and the more Americans are going to get hurt in the process. So there's a lot of prayers to go around here.
Yeah, and I don't think it's helpful that we've created this false binary, right? Between if you close the border and you have laws, you are not compassionate at all.
Right.
You're just evil and hateful toward your neighbor. And if you want open borders, that means that you are compassionate and you are loving your neighbor. And I don't think that that's what the binary is, right? I think you can have compassionate immigration laws that respect the sanctity of our country, respect the borders of our country, and prioritize the care of citizens while also encouraging people to immigrate to the United States. We are a country of immigrants. We want other people to come into our country and to contribute to our society, but we want them to do it in a way that's legal, not just because it benefits our citizens if it's done in a way that's legal, but also it benefits the ones coming into the country, right? And I know there are certain people who come into the country under dire situations, and I don't want to discount that. There is value in that, and we want to be nuanced in how we approach dealing with the people who are already here. But establishing laws or even just enforcing the laws that are already in place is not a lack of compassion.
Right.
That is a silly thing to say.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% couldn't agree more. And again, our prayers up with everybody involved on all sides of this particular issue. All right, we're going to head over to the focus story now. And as we were talking about, Canadians are at it again, booing the national anthem. So what happened at this soccer game in Vancouver?
So the captain of the Vancouver Whitecaps, Brian White, who also happens to be the all-time scorer for the team, he's an American, which apparently some of the Canadians that were gathered to watch this game must not have been aware of. But he was not too thrilled when all the Canadians, or I shouldn't say all, but many of the Canadian fans gathered at the game began booing his country, which is the United States, when our national anthem was performed at the start of the game in Vancouver. And even though the Whitecaps ultimately won a 2-1 victory, largely because of Brian White, who's from New Jersey, he did say at a press conference right after the game, "I would like to say thank you to the fans that cheered and clapped the anthem at the end and showed respect for the flag rather than denigrating it by booing."
Where have we seen this pop up elsewhere recently?
Yeah, so this is definitely not the first time this has happened since President Trump returned to the White House. A similar phenomenon occurred during a recent WWE event in Toronto, where many of the 30,000 fans that were gathered there booed the Star Spangled Banner. It's been an ongoing occurrence at hockey games, and it's starting actually to bleed now, Dan, into other sports too. Over this past weekend, fans at a game for the Toronto Raptors, which is Canada's lone NBA franchise, Canadian fans gathered for that game booed our national anthem. And all of this, of course, stems from President Trump threatening to and now ultimately imposing import tariffs on goods coming from Canada into the United States.
Well, I think the Raptors fans probably just got tired of booing their own team, who are not having a very good year. So they just needed something else to boo in the process. So, but yeah, it's an interesting trend here. And, we all know that Trudeau is stepping down. And so it's interesting that they're taking this tact. I mean, I always thought Canadians were supposed to be these, happy-go-lucky, friendly folks who are just kind and everything else. And now they're turning into the, I don't know, the bitter ones who are sitting here complaining and, booing America and stuff. And it's just it's an interesting development, and I'm not 100% sure how I feel about it, other than it just, because on the one hand, it just makes me chuckle, like, okay, have your booze, I guess. I mean, whatever. But on the other hand, it just seems, not helpful and ridiculous.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and obviously this is a controversial decision by the White House to impose these tariffs on Canada. So not even everybody in MAGA territory is completely in agreement
Right.
with President Trump on this issue. So certainly it's not a surprise to see Canadians are not necessarily thrilled with the idea.
Right.
So look, I think it's fine to have disagreements. It's fine to bicker back and forth about these things. And like you said, if somebody wants to boo, whatever, they can do what they want. We have we should be at least respecting free speech in America. So I'm happy to see people exercising free speech elsewhere also. But, I kind of think, one, it's nice to just be respectful of another country's anthem and another country's, their values. So I think, one, there's that. And then two, wouldn't it be nice to have at least one thing that wasn't just completely and absolutely
Right.
poisoned by politics?
you
Like,
can't
we
get the
can't just
escape.
enjoy something.
Can't even get the escape in sports. And listen, and Canadians, we love you, but you guys accept all these other taxes that the government's oppressing you with. Well, what's one more? Just
Right.
Well, I don't understand it. What are you guys complaining about? You're like, yay, taxes on everything else, but then you get one more slapped on there, and then you're up in arms about it. It's a little inconsistent in my mind on the Canadians, but appreciate you bringing this one to the podcast, Trey, because again, it's silly that they want to complain, but I mean, on the one hand, but on the other hand, Trump's saying that this is what they are doing to us, and so we're going to do it to them. Well, time will tell how it works out, but sometimes that's just the way of the world, and enjoy your sports game, like you said, without complaining about it, because we just want to enjoy sports. We don't need to have everything else associated with it. So appreciate you bringing that one to the focus story today. And the Asbury Revival captivated the world. We're talking to the pastor who had a front row seat to it all, coming up in just 30 seconds.
Let me tell you, the God's gonna cut you.
It's Holy Week in Jerusalem. Crowds welcome Jesus as king. Rebellion is in the air.
Jesus operates outside our jurisdiction.
Rome will descend on us all.
But instead of taking the throne, Jesus turns the tables.
My house shall be called a house of prayer, but you make it a den of thieves.
The world will never be the same. Coming soon to theaters, The Chosen Last Supper. Get your tickets now.
Pastor Zach Meerkreebs had a front row seat to a revival that captivated the entire country. He witnessed miraculous healings, powerful transformations, and an outpouring of God's presence that lasted for about 16 days. Now, he's sharing what sparked the movement and why he believes God is still working in powerful ways today. His conversation with Billy Hallowell is today's main thing.
Zach, I always love getting a chance to connect with you. You have a new book, Lower: Igniting Spiritual Awakening Through Radical Humility. Now, you've got an incredible story, and we'll get into that, but what was it that made you want to write this book?
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me, bro. And, this book has been on my heart for a while. I grew up Jewish, and I had not experienced the humility of God until I heard about the incarnation of Jesus. Like the very fact of Jesus' incarnation, him coming from the throne room into the world, just crazy humility. I was captivated by Philippians 2. And then, honestly, sad to say, I struggled a lot with pride as well, especially when I started working in the church. And that really cost me a lot, a lot of that being on my fault. So this was something I've been meditating on for a long, long time. And then in February of 2023, I got to be a part of a unique outpouring of God's Spirit at Asbury University. And coming out of that experience, Asbury outpouring, lots of people asked me to write a book. And, I joke that, I don't want to be the guy who won state in high school and still talks about it. So I didn't want to write the book on specifically the outpouring at Asbury, but I could write about this thing that I think was so foundational and so intriguing about the outpouring. That was Jesus' humility and humble response to the humility of a couple students and a couple people that would just wait and linger. And I think that's what we just experienced, was what God will do when we go low in humility. He'll fill the space that we vacate.
Yeah. Well, and that's such a needed thing in our culture right now, because the entire culture right now is built on the self, right? It's built on satisfying the self, loving the self, obsessively doing whatever the self thinks or feels. And humility is the polar opposite of that in so many ways. Obviously, it's looking to God. It's looking, at sort of this vertical relationship with God, where he's at the center and not ourselves. And I don't want to glaze over Asbury, because you were very much at the center of Asbury, and it was interesting now that I've gotten to know you, right? Looking back at when I was covering that story, not having communicated with you before, what was it like for you to see that level of fervor and love for the Lord that consistently, not just as somebody at the center of it, but as a spectator of it?
Oh, it's unbelievable, and it gave me hope. It gave me, I think what we experienced was, one of my good friends, Dr. David Thomas, said, what we're experiencing here, I remember he said that often during the 16 days at Asbury. He said, what we're experiencing here is just New Testament Christianity. This was like early church Christianity. Like, people were randomly giving thousands of dollars to people in need. People were being healed. People were being added in number daily. People were preaching in boldness. It was New Testament Christianity. And whether you were a 19-year-old college student or a 60-year-old who had been contending and longing for something like this to happen, we were experiencing New Testament Christianity. And that gave me hope. Like, I feel like ever since, I've been able to go tell stories and talk about what we saw and then hopefully raise the water level of hope and expectation in the church. And it was an honor of a lifetime. Some days I'm like, oh, I would be so tired and my feet would hurt so much again. Or I'm like teary because I miss it. I miss it so much. I get to still worship in Hughes every week on staff at Asbury now. And it still feels like a very special place, but it felt like New Testament Christianity.
Okay, this is a question you've answered before, but I think for a lot of people, there's always the skeptics that are out there, or even within the church, people who don't fully believe or understand miracles, the supernatural. What sort of supernatural, I know this is almost a tricky question because there's different layers of it, but what sort of supernatural did you experience, witness, and see during that time?
Yeah. Well, it was really unique because we really wanted to make sure the focus was not on this demonstrative expression of the supernatural. So we had a great team. A guy named Bud Simon led our prayer training. Everyone had to be trained for 3 hours before they could minister at the altar. Some, because of how spiritually charged things were happening, we wanted to do that in such a way that dignified the person, but also held space for what the room was about. So we saw healings, we saw freedom, we saw deliverance. But a lot of that, a funny story, I got coffee with Bud a couple months after everything ended at Hughes, and I was like, man, it seems pretty chill in the room. He starts belly laughing because he was like, well, we kind of had a system that to dignify the person, we had a lot of prayer rooms throughout the building that we would kind of lead them to and counsel through. But we saw eyes receive sight. We saw people get out of wheelchairs. We had a basketball player who did not know Jesus at the beginning of the week, gave his life to Christ midweek, and by that night had prayed for someone and their tumors disappeared. And
wow.
It was unbelievable. But that's what happens when the presence of God moves into a place. You don't have to exert yourself a whole lot besides just steward and curate meetings between God's Spirit and God's people.
Final 30 seconds here before we go. This is the question, right? Are we in the midst of a revival in your view right now? When you look at what is happening, not just at Asbury, but across the country, across the world even right now, and just in light of where we are, what do you think?
Maybe this is cheeseball because I wrote a book called Lower, but I'm so unintelligent when it comes to that stuff. And so I don't know, I haven't studied it enough. I do believe that we are in a unique season, and there have been unique outpourings of his Spirit. I think you get enough outpourings of the Spirit, you start really seeing the dry ground sprout into life. You see outpouring, see dead things come to life. You sustain revival, maybe we'll see an awakening. So as a random 35-year-old dude in Kentucky, I'm pretty encouraged, but I'll let way smarter spiritual people say if we're in revival or not.
Yeah, they can haggle over the outpouring versus revival, all the different language that's out there.
Dude.
Well, listen,
I'll eat
Zach,
pizza and hang out with my girls. That's what
that's all you got to do. That sounds good to me. And of course, you'll be out there promoting Lower, igniting spiritual awakening through radical humility. Appreciate your time today.
Appreciate you, bro.
All right, appreciate that conversation, Billy. It was interesting and great to listen to. We all were captivated by what was going on in Asbury, and people want to see more of that. I want to see more of it around the country, of moves of God where people are really excited and on fire, ignited by the Holy Spirit and on fire for God. So appreciate that story on the podcast today, Billy. And that's going to leave us with time for one last thing.
Psalm 138:8 says, "The Lord will fulfill his purpose for me. Your steadfast love, O Lord, endures forever. Do not forsake the work of your hands."
Yeah, great verse there. And again, reminding us that we have a purpose, right? I think some people, it's so easy in the world today to get lost in what we're doing in the day-to-day that we kind of forget, like, well, God, what is your purpose for me? But we might not always be able to see it clearly, but we need to have that trust that he does have a purpose and a plan for each and every one of us. So good spot to leave it there on the podcast today. As always, make sure you're getting on over to cbnnews.com and faithwire.com for more news from a Christian perspective. Lord willing, that creek don't rise up on us. We'll be back tomorrow with more. God bless. See you then.